Welcome everybody, and this is the first video on League of Chell. League of Chell is going to be a channel where I break down interesting topics in the hockey world as it exists in the NHL. And this first video is going to be about basically how the Seattle Kraken were constructed, sort of conjectures about the mindsets of how they were constructed, and what I believe the history or the coming years will see and how Ron Francis' construction will turn out. So it all started, of course, with the expansion draft. Well, it started before the expansion draft. It started when the expansion draft was upcoming. The expansion draft being where Seattle, being the newest team in the NHL, is a team with zero assets, and except for their allotment of draft picks. So they needed to have an instant boost in the form of grabbing one player from each team in the NHL that already existed, except for the Vegas Golden Knights. And the philosophies going in that people predicted Seattle would have were either they could kind of make a competitive team, but not necessarily a team of the same caliber as Vegas, but they could have made a team that would make the playoffs out of the Pacific Division, because the Pacific is projected to be a very weak division. Or they could have just maximized cap space, and the fact that the cap is not going up anytime soon would have been a great idea in terms of having a team that could be really competitive, like cup contending in 3, 4, 5 years when their accruement of prospects pan out. So looking at the way the roster's created, it's hard without the context of who was. Oh, well, you can see who was in the expansion. So we look at all the expansion signings and ignore all of the names. So if you see this where it's signed, this was not in the expansion draft. So all the expansion drafts, of course, the best ones would be ones like Jordan Emberley, Yanni Gord was a great pick. Donskoy I liked. I really did not like the Brandon Tanev grab. Jared McNann's a great pickup. So sort of these good pickups, but after the expansion draft, you looked and they had so much cap space. But it also looked like they had left some names on the table. Vladimir Tarasenko was available, we remember. Max Domi was available. People thought that would have been a good idea. Or James Van Riemsdyk from the Flyers. And they really didn't make their team in any way as the best they could have, because they wanted cap space. Which at worst, you understood. You understood that was their strategy, and you didn't necessarily have to agree, but you understood. Now, looking at their team, now, after they've signed, they have now only $9 million cap space. I can remember, I think they had about like 25, maybe $30 million in cap space left over, something around that number. And now their team is... So who they signed Jaden Schwartz to a really long deal. They signed a really good goalie in Phil Grubauer, who was a Vezina candidate, but it's a long contract, and you don't really know if he's as good as that number would lead you to believe. And you look at the other signings, Alexander Wenberg, who's a good player, but I don't love all these signings. So I wouldn't put their free agency signings up over any hump that they weren't above before. I think they can still squeeze into the playoffs. I think the Pacific is a very weak division, and they're fortunate to be in it. But I look at a team like Arizona, and this is going to transition into the next part of the video, which is a phrase that I use describing hockey teams, which is perpetual mediocrity. Perpetual mediocrity being a state of team where you can be a couple things. You can be the Arizona Coyotes. You can be what right now is intentionally bad. Intentionally bad. This team is terrible. This is going to be one of the worst teams. Phil Kessel's playing out his last year here, and I'm sure he does not want to stay. This no movement clause is going to get waived. I'm sure he'd love to move. Players like Clayton Keller are stuck here for the next couple of years. A lot of players are going to come here to die, and Ryan Dzingel's coming, but he doesn't look like I'm sure he's not excited. this team's bad. Shane Gostisbehere got traded here, not for much back. But you look at their draft picks, and they have next year 7 picks in the first 2 rounds. They have their first for all 3 years. They have picks in upcoming years already. This is a team who's doing something. They're being intentionally bad. What is going on here is this team is bad, but intentionally. And then you look at the Leafs. The Leafs, if we start out doing the opposite of what we did with the Coyotes, we look at the draft. Like, where are their picks? Where are their picks for next year? They only have a first and a second for next year's draft. Like, this team is not going to be good a couple of years from now. They can't be. And where's their cap space? How are they going to make their team different? Well, their team is already good. They are an intentionally good team now. This team is, as much as you like to laugh at them every playoffs, and I honestly think that they're worse this year than they were last year, looking at the team overall. I don't know if Peter Mrazek's going to play well here. Peter Mrazek is he is a streaky goalie, and you don't want to sign streaky goalies from what I've observed because they don't necessarily mold to every environment they play in. Austin Matthews is amazing. He's one of the best players in the league, top 3, honestly. John Tavares is encroaching on some of the bad years of this contract. I think these last 2 years are going to be bad. I think this is going to be the first year where we see this was not a contract signed to be good forever. At some point it was going to get bad, and I think it's going to start to get bad. Mitch Marner I still think is a good player, but I think you overpaid for what he is. I think he doesn't deserve this. But we're not going to lose too much. I'm saying that this is a team that is intentionally good. Now, to look at an example of a team that I think existed in perpetual mediocrity would be something like the Minnesota Wild for a long time. The Minnesota Wild existed where this was a lot of their years. Missed the playoffs barely, missed the playoffs barely, missed the playoffs. This was, a great year. Conference quarterfinals, 2012, 2013. They must have ran into the Chicago Blackhawks. Second round lost. First round lost. Missed the playoffs by a mile. Qualifying round lost. In all these years, they're not really getting a high draft pick. Like, who on this roster is a high draft pick? And you're looking at them going into next year is they have more hope because they had a really good year this year. They honestly did, but they really can't ever. I don't foresee them anytime soon, and I've never seen this in the past decade, getting over this hump of mediocrity. So you don't want to be this. This is the worst, in my opinion, this is the worst state of a team. Even though you're finishing high in the standings and a team like Arizona will. Arizona is going to be close to the bottom. You can see in the future how they could be better. There's, you can project them to be better. I can't project Minnesota really getting out of this bubble of mediocrity. And, Toronto, you can project that later they're going to be terrible. Maybe 4 years from now, maybe in like these last 2 years of John Ferris' contract, you can predict that they're going to be really bad. But as of now, you can't deny that they're a good team. And that's where we look at Seattle. Seattle, you really can't project them to be a good team. They could squeak into the playoffs. I think they could comfortably make the playoffs this year. I do not think they could win the Cup this year. And I don't think that they're going to be able to get a lot of assets. Their pick selection now is fine. This is fine. This is a mediocre, selection of picks. They have a decent amount of picks. And their roster's fine. They're okay. They're going to win more games than they lose in the regular season. And once it comes to the playoffs, they're going to play a higher seed and they're going to get knocked out in the first round. And this is what I'm talking about with perpetual mediocrity. I don't like how Seattle is constructed, where they just sort of thrust themselves into this state of what I predict to be perpetual mediocrity. And I think it happened, and I heard this idea, and I like it a lot, where when Seattle first did their expansion draft, people who are fans of the team, new fans, probably lived in Seattle, probably read something somewhere that this team is not going to be very good. And I can imagine the fans were decently frustrated to be like, this is our new team. We're really excited for this team, and they're going to suck right out the gate. I'm not excited for that anymore. And you've already bought your jersey. You'd probably be very frustrated. So I can see how when free agency started, we already knew they kind of wanted Jaden Schwartz. I don't remember hearing any Wenberg stuff. I don't remember hearing much Grubauer stuff. I thought their goalies were already pretty good. But you look at this team now, and it's like, was this a reaction? Was this a sort of, move by Ron Francis to react to what the public said and kind of stray away from the original plan? Because the way they did expansion draft, I can't imagine that they stayed perfectly true to their original plan once free agency started. And that's basically, more of a season preview / my projection for how Seattle's going to be. And if you like these videos or you want me to talk about something else, please leave a comment. I want ideas of what to talk about on this channel. All right, thank you very much.